Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, the Toronto Maple Leafs are taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning in Game 1, Round 1 in the Stanley Cup playoffs tonight. So let's go over some of the news and notes, some of the lines, some of the narratives heading into this series. First of all, I want to ask you guys how you're feeling heading into this playoff series, because in yesterday's video, we talked about what I thought were the biggest concerns for the Maple Leafs heading into Game 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and that video wasn't meant to play on anyone's anxiety. I just wanted to lay everything out onto the table. You know, what do we have to be worried about, and then we could talk about things rationally and process them better when they're happening on the TV over the next week or week and a half or so. But in today's video, I just want to, talk about the lines, set the narratives, go over a couple of news and notes, and just sort of get ready for Game 1. Because personally, I'm feeling nervous excited. You know, the feeling on Christmas Eve when you don't know what's under the tree just yet and you're trying to size up all the boxes, figuring out if the Maple Leafs are going to bring you a second round or not. That's how I'm feeling right now. Nervous excited. But in looking at the last look that we got at the Toronto Maple Leaf lineup going into the playoffs here, there's some interesting choices here. But I'm not new here. You're not new here. We don't know how much of this is just gamesmanship or not, right? We don't actually know if the Maple Leafs are going to reunite Michael Bunting with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. We don't know, how fluid these lines are going to be throughout the game. And that is one of this team's greatest strengths this year, is that there is a lot of fluidity to their lines. They can move and switch and play guys up and down in the lineup depending on the situation that they're in. But pretending that those lines stay the same, let's talk about them. Because Michael Bunting, Austin Matthews, and Mitch Marner were one of the most consistent and most productive lines in the entire NHL last year. And because they spent so much time playing apart from each other and the Maple Leafs were able to explore other options and find successful combinations that work with different players there, if you did need to split these three guys up at any point, you could feel confident in doing so. Whereas last year, this is all you kind of knew. And if the line wasn't working, it wasn't working, and you wouldn't have felt confident about going to any other combination because you just didn't know what worked and what didn't. Now, the line of John Tavares, Ryan O'Reilly, and William Nylander, I think, has the potential to be a lot of fun when playing together, because John Tavares is one of the best in the entire league at winning puck battles. Ryan O'Reilly, one of the best in the entire league at winning puck battles. And William Nylander, in terms of forwards to play at least 1,000 minutes at 5-on-5 this season, he's fourth in the entire league in terms of takeaways per 60 minutes. That line is just designed to have the puck, and there's nothing that you could do about it. When it comes to generating offense from cycling the puck and off the forecheck, John Tavares, Ryan O'Reilly, and William Nylander are some of the best players in the entire NHL at doing so. And again, a really underrated aspect to this series that not a lot of people are talking about. Again, the Tampa Bay Lightning do not have Ryan McDonagh, and they've cut back on Victor Hedman's minutes a lot so far this season. He is no longer the time on ice leader on that blue line for the Lightning. That's Mikhail Sergachev. He went from playing the most amount of minutes up against the other team's best players last season to just playing the fourth most time on ice up against the other team's best players this year. They don't have the same shutdown capability, so who they're deciding to match up against Matthews and Marner, I don't know who they're going to use to match up against that other line there, but good luck to them. And this is where what I was talking about earlier comes into play, with the Leafs lines being a little bit fluid. Depending on the situation, Ryan O'Reilly, if you need a goal, is going to be playing in the top six. If you don't need a goal and you need to defend later on in the game, Ryan O'Reilly can be one of the best shutdown centers in the entire NHL. Last year, the Maple Leafs used Ilya Mikheyev, David Kampf, and Pierre Engvall as their shutdown line. And in heavy defensive zone minutes, that line was able to control the vast majority of the shot attempts, the actual shots, the expected goals, and the scoring opportunities. And this year, we didn't get to see a large enough sample size, to be super, super excited and say, yeah, that's concrete 100%. Our shutdown line with Ryan O'Reilly on it. But Sheldon Keefe in 13 games, or throughout 13 games, has used Alex Kerfoot, Ryan O'Reilly, and Noah Chari in about 12 minutes of ice time. And in those 12 minutes, they have absolutely annihilated the competition in even harsher defensive zone minutes than what Sheldon Keefe was using Mikheyev, Kampf, and Engvall in last year. The Maple Leafs have one of the best shutdown centers in the entire NHL this year. and that's something that they did not have last year. David Kampf was pretty damn good, but Ryan O'Reilly is that much better. One more time, just because I can, and I like saying it, the Toronto Maple Leafs have Ryan O'Reilly on their team this year, one of the best shutdown centers in the entire NHL. And the luxury of having that at your disposal just can't be talked about enough, because when he is playing all those harsh defensive zone minutes, what that's doing is it's freeing up guys like Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander to do what they do best and just score goals. And then that fourth line of Zach Aston Reese, David Kampf, and Sam Lafferty, they haven't necessarily fared as well in heavy defensive zone minutes. The numbers aren't necessarily the best, but what I'm looking for these guys here is to just really just tie those minutes, not get caved in those heavy defensive zone minutes. They're the B team in terms of the shutdown group, and as long as they're tying their minutes and not getting completely caved in, I can consider that a win for this team, because that means they're freeing up guys like Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander, again, to do what they do best. They don't have to play the defensive zone minutes. They can just focus on scoring the goals. Obviously, I would like to see the fourth line be winning their minutes, but at the same time, this fourth line is a lot more useful and serves a much larger purpose than, I want to say, any fourth line they've had in the last couple of years. In looking at the D pairings here, this is basically what the Maple Leafs have wanted to roll out ever since the end of the trade deadline. Jake McCabe and TJ Brodie is their shutdown pairing. Last year against the Tampa Bay Lightning, Sheldon Keefe used Jake Muzzin and TJ Brodie as the shutdown pair, and those guys were able to tie or slightly just even win those minutes a little bit. And if Jake McCabe and TJ Brodie can do that again this year, that puts them in a very good spot. And then Mark Giordano and Justin Hall is sort of the B team when it comes to shutting things down. And I know people, they're down on Justin Hall. They're always down on Justin Hall. But ever since the Maple Leafs acquired Jake McCabe, I feel like that's pushed Justin Hall lower down in the lineup. He hasn't had to play the same difficulty of minutes, where he was playing the most difficult minutes on the entire blue line earlier on in the season, which is something that he just shouldn't be doing. And I think he's found a lot more consistency in his game, and I haven't really noticed him the last month or so of the regular season, which is a good thing. If you're not noticing Justin Hall, then he's doing all the little things that he does well, and you could just leave him to that. But the last pairing, Morgan Riley and Luke Shen, is really the wild card for this whole blue line. And it's disappointing, because the whole idea of acquiring Jake McCabe and going with shutdown pair A and shutdown pair B is that McCabe and Brodie, Giordano, and Hall, theoretically, are going to handle all of the tough assignments and all of the defensive zone minutes, which should leave Morgan Riley to just play offense and rack up as many points as he possibly can. The guy isn't good at defense. Okay, well then stop putting him out there when you're up a goal or two late in the game. And having those first two pairs allows you to do that. But the problem with it is that when playing in those elevated offensive minutes, when getting an opportunity to just worry about offense, Morgan Riley hasn't played well over the last month or so. And maybe Luke Chen isn't the best defensive partner that Morgan Riley has ever had, but there's no way that he's the worst. Morgan Riley has had a lot less to work with in years past, and he has found ways to be effective. I want to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. He's been one of my favorite Maple Leafs for as long as he's been on the team, basically. He had a knee injury earlier on in the year. Is that something that's affecting him? He has been known to be a guy that turns his game up come playoff time. Is he sort of been waiting for, the calendar to flip from the regular season to the playoffs to really dial things up? I don't know. I don't want to say that he's been playing bad on purpose, but it is concerning. This is a massive edge that the Maple Leafs should have on the Lightning in being able to use Morgan Riley freely and just as many offensive zone minutes as they can get him, and they just haven't been able to take advantage of that yet. And then in net, of course, is Ilya Samsonov, who was ninth in the entire NHL in terms of goals save above expected. When looking at both the quantity and quality of opportunities that the Maple Leafs defense allowed in front of him, Samsonov was one of the better goalies in the entire NHL. The only little bit of a hiccup there is that Andrei Vasilevsky is on the other side of the ice, and he was also one of the best goalies in the entire NHL this year. But in comparing last year's series to this year's series, I think the gap between Andrei Vasilevsky and Ilya Samsonov is a lot smaller than what the gap was between Andrei Vasilevsky and Jack Campbell. So the Maple Leafs goaltending is a lot better heading into this year's series. I saw a lot of people talking about this on Twitter, so I figured I'd mention it in the video here, but Wes McCauley is going to be one of the officials in tonight's game, and Wes McCauley was also one of the refs in Game 7 last year against the Tampa Bay Lightning, where the Maple Leafs had 2 phantom high-sticking penalties go against them, and also a goal called back, the one that Tavares scored, where Justin Hall was called for the interference on the pick play. And now, I don't care how biased this sounds, working for TSN, working for SportsCenter, I've watched a lot of hockey games this year, and I see that same interference, that same pick play happen once a week for the last 6 months, basically, and it never gets called. But it's been called twice in the last 6 months in Maple Leaf games where Wes McCauley has been officiating. I don't know if that's him out to get the Maple Leafs. There is some history there with him and Sheldon Keefe. I won't get into it. If you want to Google it, you can Google it. But then again, the Maple Leafs are 5-0-1 in the 6 games that Wes McCauley has officiated this year. So I don't really know how much I want to play up the narrative. But at the same time, it does bring back memories to last year, and I do understand why people are making a big deal out of it. I said this in yesterday's video, and I'm going to say it again here. I'm going to be very careful with the narrative that the Tampa Bay Lightning are over or past their primes, or, they've played way too much hockey in the last 3 or 4 years that they just don't have it anymore, or they're banged up and they're bruised and they're not as good. But at the same time, when you're looking at the numbers for guys like Victor Hedman and you're looking at his stats from last year, you're comparing them to this year. Like we already mentioned earlier on in the video, he is not the time on ice leader on this blue line anymore. That's Mikhail Sergachev. They've also cut his minutes back from playing the most amount of minutes up against the other team's best players last season to playing the 4th most on their blue line this season. Does he turn it up? Does he crank it up a notch once the playoff starts? I don't know. I guess he could, but at the same time, he could just not. This team also doesn't have Ryan McDonough anymore. They don't have the same shutdown capability. They're also missing Andre Palat, who scored 3 goals and 2 assists, had 5 points in that 7-game series last year, scored a couple really big goals for them. They're still a very, very talented team that is another year older, another year bruised and battered, and I think we should look at these stats and maybe, they make us feel a little bit good about ourselves, but I don't think they should be the reason why we think the Maple Leafs are going to win this series. I don't know how much of this quote is just gamesmanship. Steven Stamkos trying to play the Leafs up and paint themselves out to be the underdog here, but he's making about the same point that we've been making here on the channel for the last while now, and a lot of other people have. The Leafs added some really good quality players, some players that you would want on your team at this time of the year. They're an improved team from last year, and it went 7 games. It's going to be an extremely difficult series. And I can't help but look at the additions that the Maple Leafs made in Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari, Jake McCabe, and just the goaltending. The goaltending alone, Samsonov being so much better and so much more consistent than what Jack Campbell was last year. And then you look at the Lightning and they lost Ryan McDonough, they lost Andre Palat. Victor Hedman's sort of taken a step back. Yeah, Andrei Vasilevsky is still extremely, extremely scary. I could sit here for 10 minutes and run down just a giant list of impressive playoff stats from him over the last 3 seasons. But they didn't really add anybody at this year's deadline. Tanner Jeannot, and he's a good player, but he's just kind of practicing with the team right now. He's injured, probably not going to play game 1, may not see him to the end of the series, and at that point, how much of a factor is he really going to play? So even though I made that video yesterday talking about what the Maple Leafs should be most concerned about heading into this series, the Lightning, they want to take a lot of penalties. They want to rope you into taking a lot of penalties because more often than not, in most matchups, they're going to have the better power play. They're going to have the better goaltender. They're comfortable not playing 5-on-5. So the Maple Leafs, you either got to beat them at that game or you got to avoid it altogether. Morgan Rielly, he's got to step up his game. He usually does come playoff time, so I'm hopeful that he can. Michael Bunting's been sort of a target over the last month or so by the officials. How does that play a factor in this series and the Lightning's ability to play their style of game? You know, the Maple Leafs' power play over the last couple of years in the playoffs hasn't been good when they've needed them the most. Can they step up? Can they be better in this game? Despite all of those things, I'm picking the Leafs to win in this series. Ryan O'Reilly is an X Factor. Literally, his nickname is The Factor that can't be ignored here. It gives this team so much more flexible, and it frees them up to do so much more. They don't have to worry about the matchup game. They don't have to worry about so much with him out there on the ice. But at the same time, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs and it's the Tampa Bay Lightning. So who knows? I didn't pick the Leafs to win last season, but I am picking them to win this year against the Lightning. And I guess we'll just have to see how that plays out. So make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one. Go Leafs go.